everyone, and welcome back to another episode of this podcast. Today, we're joined by Katy Massey. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, just to start off, can you tell our listeners just a bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So, my name is Katie, and I'm a specialist in girls' rights. I do a mixture of working for a global NGO, leading a professionals network of organizations and activists who really care about girls' rights. I'm also a consultant, so I work strategically with CEOs and directors of charities and organizations to support them with strategy, operations, vision, that kind of thing. I'm a trauma informed doula. So I volunteer as a doula predominantly with women who are in the asylum system or victims of modern slavery. And I'm also studying a very part-time master's over about 5 years in education, gender, and international development. And I'm kind of broadly looking at girls' access to education in humanitarian crises, but more recently focusing on the mental health and well-being of humanitarian workers.
That's so interesting. You're doing a bit of everything.
Mm. Yeah.
So, focusing on, you said you're a trauma informed doula.
Yeah.
So postnatal depression and the emotions that women go through during their pregnancy are often very neglected and overlooked. They're viewed
Mm.
as a taboo topic. No one really mentions them when they talk about pregnancy. I think pregnancy is really looked as a positive thing, which it is, but I think there are a lot of negatives that come alongside it that are overlooked. What do you think can be done to help women overcome this? Or in your experience, what have you seen that's been done to overcome this?
Yeah, it's a huge topic. And I think I can speak from my experience of being a doula. As I said, predominantly my clients have been women who have been in the asylum system, teen pregnancies, kind of young people in care, and victims of modern slavery. And so I think not only in those situations do we need to look at their experience of their pregnancy, of their childbirth, and then their postpartum experience, but also what else is going on in their lives around that as well, which can obviously contribute to any feelings of challenge or difficulty that they might be experiencing. And so I think I would answer this question in two parts. I think the first part is how can we support women and birthing people um, on an individual basis? What can be done? And initially, it's really around listening, talking, breaking down the stigma. Like you said, lots of people celebrate pregnancy and say, "Isn't it a brilliant thing?" And it can then feel really difficult to say, "Actually, I'm finding this hard," or "I'm potentially regretting this
Yeah.
experience," or "I'm not really sure how I feel about this experience, but it isn't all joy and elation." And I don't know where to go with that because I might be seen as being kind of a bad parent, or someone that's vocally talking about how challenging it is, and worrying about the stigma of that. And so I think on an individual level, really the most important thing is that we listen to these experiences without judgment. I
Mhm.
think especially if we haven't had children ourselves, it can be really hard to try and understand what that may feel like. So trying to suspend any judgment, and creating a safe space for that. But I think on a systemic level, I mean, if we think about the UK, it has the third highest expensive childcare in the world. Now,
Mhm.
the stress of that, alongside the fact that you've just become a new parent, and um, all of the feelings, the hormones, the emotions, and the life changes that go with that, to then know that you're bringing a child into the third most expensive childcare system, and the kind of implications of that on your life choices, on your job, on your home situation, on your caring responsibilities, is huge. And so I think systemically, that is something that really needs to change. And there's amazing organizations doing really great work on that. For example, Pregnant and Screwed is an amazing organization doing lots of advocacy on that. And I think we also know it's very widely reported that the NHS is underfunded, and the
Mhm.
implication of that as well on people's experiences of childbirth, pregnancy, and then postpartum is really significant. And I've seen that in my experience being a doula in London, that often there isn't consistency of care because there isn't the capacity for that. And
Mhm.
actually, that's what you really need during pregnancy and childbirth. You need to be able to see the same person all the way through, so that you can build that trust. You can have those vulnerable conversations where you might be feeling scared or overwhelmed by your pregnancy or by the prospect of childbirth. And it's hard then if you keep seeing a different person at each of your appointments, and you may only get 15 or 20 minutes in those
Mhm.
appointments as well. So that's what I find so wonderful about being a doula, is that you actually get to be that person for the family, for the birthing people, for the women who are pregnant, and you can provide that continuity of care, because that's really important as well.
That sounds so interesting. I think it's I mean, not many people know that this position, like this job even exists. Like no one knows what a doula does. I think if I went around asking my friends what a doula does, they wouldn't even know what they are. So I
Yeah.
think definitely like raising more awareness about the job itself is so important, just so people know that there is that support once you are pregnant and post pregnancy.
Yeah.
So going to back to your journey as a girls' rights specialist,
Mhm.
um, it's amazing. Could you share with us what ignited your passion for advocating for girls' rights and what inspired you to establish the Joyful Activists?
Yeah, of course. So, my grandparents lived in Malawi for much of my childhood, and I was lucky enough to go out to Malawi and visit them for a month or so. And I remember having a really poignant moment. I was with my dad, and I was about 6 years old, and I could see two girls that were playing. It was maybe like a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon, and it was during the day, and they were playing outside their house. And I said to my dad, like, why aren't they at school? And he said, oh, actually, like, not all girls get to go to school, like in the world. And it was definitely the first time I realized my own privilege. I didn't have the words for it, didn't know what that meant, but it was really the first memorable time I thought, oh, not everyone gets to experience the same kind of life or access to things. And remember going back to school then, coming back to the UK and going to school and thinking, God, I moan really about having to do homework, or when it's school holidays are over and I have to go back to school, and I'm like sad about it. And so that definitely planted a seed. And then I think from that point on, just always cared about kind of global issues, and wanting to know what was going on in the world, and was lucky enough to do a lot of traveling. And I initially trained as a teacher, and found myself um, more often supporting girls who are really struggling, teen girls who are really struggling, navigating their hormones, their emotions, puberty, potentially didn't have a kind of role model in their life. And so from that point on, I thought, okay, yeah, this is really an area that I feel passionate about. I also had some experiences myself as a teenager where I really struggled and wished I had someone to talk to, and wished that there was like equal access to services, and so I think it's all kind of stemmed from there really.
That's
And
yeah.
your second question, which was around the joyful activists. So I mentioned my academic research has most recently focused on the mental health and well-being of humanitarian workers, and I've worked in the charity sector for about 15 years and had some amazing experiences and learned so much along the way. But it's had a really significant impact on my mental health at times as well, because I've often been working in organisations dealing with domestic violence and abuse,
Mm,
children who have been excluded from school, children in the care system. I've worked on serious case reviews, so the kind of the most significant child protection issues. And that stuff has to go somewhere. And
mm,
sometimes I would find that I would really internalize that and wish that I had a safe space to connect with other activists, or other charity workers who are really passionate about what they do, but also sometimes just need to put it down and like have a break and do something fun.
yeah.
And so when I was doing my academic research, I was realizing and kind of finding that there wasn't really much provision out there, specifically for this kind of sector. So I thought, well, why not create it myself? And so about 3 or 4 months ago, I founded the Joyful Activists. And so the clue is in the name. I want to bring joy to our activism.
Mm,
And so it's not about us saying, this is too much, I don't want to do it anymore. But it's about us saying, I love this. I'm really passionate about this and it's really hard. And so sometimes I need to rest and reset. And so it'll be a mixture of virtual wellbeing workshops that will be accessible globally. There'll be a membership element to it as well, so people can log in to a website and an app and connect with each other. And I'll be hosting retreats as well around the world, so people can kind of take 3 or 4 days out of their busy lives being activists and come and reset.
That sounds really interesting. I think, yeah, I think no one really thinks of that side of, yeah, it's amazing activists do such amazing work, but no one thinks of the impact that it could have on them.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. That's really interesting. I've never heard of anything like that being done before.
Yeah, well, I kind of looked at it when I was looking at um, my latest research. I was looking at the provision of girls' education following the Turkey-Syria earthquake earlier this
Mhm.
year, and so many of those programs will focus, rightly so, on direct delivery in the aftermath of an event
Mhm.
and a disaster like that. And measure those programs will kind of measure outcomes like how many children are in the classroom, or how many of these care packages are we giving out, or how many blankets, or how many food parcels, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And those are all really important things to measure. But I kind of, when I was really looking at it, I thought, well, who's zooming out and looking at the people who are providing that support? And actually, it's really important that we support those people, because if they burn out, or they quit, or they leave, you have to bring in and train a new kind of cohort of staff. And so therefore the implication on the program itself will be that it won't be delivered as effectively as wanted anyway. And so I kind of was thinking, was trying to zoom out and see a bit of the bigger picture. And yeah, like I said, from my own experience as well, like I really wish in
Mhm.
my last 15 years there had been a space where I could safely share, I love my job and sometimes I'm finding this really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So going more towards the Girls' Rights Collective.
Mm.
So it plays a very significant role in empowering girls um, and what they can do and their rights. So can you elaborate on maybe some impactful initiatives or projects that have helped shape the lives of young girls and amplify their voices that you've been a part of or that you've seen?
Yeah, of course. So the Girls' Rights Collective UK is a professionals network. It's part of my role at Plan International UK that I convene the professionals network. And so it is open to anyone who works or volunteers with or for girls in the UK. And so it's full of brilliant organisations, academics, activists from all over the UK who work and volunteer in lots of different things. So it might be girls in sport, or girls' experiences of racism, or girls and their mental health, or getting girls into volunteering. So there's kind of lots of names that people might recognise in there, and lots of grassroots organisations and brilliant individuals. And I love convening the Girls' Rights Collective because I get to see on a daily basis all of these amazing projects who are working across the UK in girls' rights. And so I couldn't possibly list them all. There's over kind of 350, 400 members so far of the collective, and they're all doing such incredible work, whether it's program design, delivery, research, advocacy, campaigning. Um, but I think, kind of to broadly answer the question, the most impactful work I see is work that is deeply rooted in the girls' experiences themselves. I think um, anything that is girl centered or youth centered that has asked the community that it's serving, like, what do you want and need, and is able to build a program around that rather than building a program around what a funder might say or might want, I think is where you see the most impact. And it's really important that we do in-depth research into girls' experiences across the UK. And we also know that there are limitations of research in that they only reach the people that they reach. And so we always need to have a seat, an empty seat in those conversations for the girls who haven't been reached. And it's not their
Yeah.
responsibility they haven't been reached, it's always ours.
Mhm.
But I think that's also really important to like always hold in mind that we might think that we've designed or developed a really impactful program, but have we actually considered whether it's really accessible or available to everyone and to all girls? And what
Mhm.
about those girls who aren't at the table, who have kind of been forgotten? So yeah, I think to answer that question, the most impactful are organizations or programs that are asking those questions.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I think I mean, like you mentioned, girls' rights and is very multifaceted and very complex. You need to hear those voices to see what they actually need. Can you share some of the most critical challenges that you've encountered in your work and how you approach addressing them, perhaps to avoid repeating them, or yeah, how did you overcome them?
I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that. That would be amazing if someone had one answer to that question. I think, like I said, so my career has spanned. I've been a teacher. I've worked in a domestic violence charity. I've run youth programs, social action programs. I've worked in the UK and overseas as well. And I think in all of them, on an individual level, we can achieve quite a lot. So, we might be able to design a program that really specifically meets the need of that one community and really serves those girls, whether it's around their access to period products, or whether it's around access to education or access to mental health services, whatever it is. We might design something that's really impactful in that kind of silo. The challenge, we know, is that globally, girls and women's rights issues are kind of systemic. And
Mhm.
we know that the latest data is that we're at least 300 years away from global gender equality. And so that is a critical challenge, that
Mhm.
gender inequality is embedded in every system that exists, and it's not ever going to be on one idea, one type of program, one person, one country, one government that's going to be able to
Mhm.
like undo all of that. Everything is so connected. And I think when I first started my master's, which was in 2020, I had a bit of an existential crisis, because I was looking at global education systems and, looking at just how prevalent it is for there to be gender inequality in access to
Mhm.
education. And I just thought, well, how are we ever going to do anything? Like, how are we ever going to resolve
Yeah.
this? Because it isn't just about getting girls into a classroom and sat behind a desk. We know that. We know that it's so related to politics, to geography, to funding, to everything is so connected.
Yeah.
And I remember, yeah, having a bit of an existential crisis, thinking, I just don't know what I can bring to this.
Mhm.
I don't know I don't know where to start. And so I think, yeah, a critical challenge is that everything is connected, and we can have an impact in our small way, and hope, that will ripple out, and that there is such an incredible movement of people who are working and advocating in this space. And something that I get such strength from is knowing that it might be 300 years until we achieve gender equality, which is clearly not in my lifetime, my children's lifetime, maybe not my grandchildren's lifetime either. But I'm still here doing it, and so are so many other people. And I
Mm.
think, despite all of those critical challenges, like, that brings me such strength that we're still fighting for a better world.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's so common, like you said, I think activists I mean, personally, it's a thing for me where I would love to help everyone all at once
Mhm.
and have the effects seen immediately, but I think
Yeah.
it's hard to kind of snap back into reality and say we can't really solve these problems overnight, and it is gonna take a lot of us. But yeah, one small step at a time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also realizing where you are best placed, like what is your skill set best suited to, and knowing that it's not
Mhm.
going to be everything, and that there are certain situations where you're not the best person to be in the room, even if you care about it or you're passionate.
Mhm.
And I think so much of my work and my research is also looking around anti-racism and decolonization. And so I know, as a white woman, like, I have a huge amount of learning and listening to do, and there are some conversations or some situations where I am not the right person to be in
Mm.
that room at that table. And that's just equally as important to know as well. I think, for me, that
Yeah.
even if I care about all of these issues, there are some of them that it's not my, it's not my place, it's not my fight, and there are other
Mhm.
ways I can support that. But it isn't often by my voice being the one that's being heard.
Yeah, yeah, and definitely like you just touched upon, your expertise kind of extends to different cultural contexts. So how do you ensure that your advocacy respects diverse perspectives and the unique challenges that are faced by girls from various backgrounds? Because I guess we see things from our perspective, and it's quite hard to see things from other people's perspectives without having lived through it. So how do
Yeah.
you approach this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that I'm always doing and learning about every day. I don't have like a perfect answer, and I definitely know I'm not going to do it perfectly, but I'm so willing to listen and learn.
Mhm,
Um, I think the first thing is it's around listening and it's around educating myself. So reading from incredible writers and advocates around anti-racism and decolonization, and learning from them, being humble in that as well. Like that's definitely something that I value hugely, is knowing that I have expertise in some things, but that doesn't mean that I am an expert or that I'm the best person at that. But
mhm,
it means that I've got experience and I've learned things, and maybe that's useful for me to share. But I always try and come to any of these conversations from a collaborative point of view.
mhm,
And as I mentioned, I was having that kind of crisis when I first started my masters, when I realized just how monumental, this task is of trying to achieve equality. And one of my lecturers just really helpfully said to me, like, you need to find your niche and you need to
mhm,
collaborate on it. Like, you don't go into these rooms and say, I'm here to lead, or I'm here to say this is what we're going to do. You go in humbly and you say, here's what I can offer. Could we collaborate? Is this something that's, helpful for you? Um, and so I think, yeah, listening, learning, being humble, um, and yeah, really valuing that, like you said, everyone's going to view the world through their lens. So I'm
mhm,
also really curious to always learn about myself. Like, what is my lens? How am I viewing the world? So I've had a lot of therapy over the years, a lot of clinical supervision and mentoring, because I really value people like holding a mirror up to me and saying, did you know that you've got this kind of like blind spot in your practice or in your understanding? Or do you know that you're holding this belief and you're kind of perpetuating it? So I really value that as well, like people giving me honest feedback and saying, hey, this was great, this could be better.
yeah, I think that's such a useful kind of mindset to have is we don't know all the answers, and we
Mm-hmm.
have to like open up a collaborative environment where we can learn from each other.
Yeah, and knowing that people are the experts on themselves. And so in terms
Mhm,
of like our work, knowing that the communities that we may be um, working with or supporting, or designing or delivering any programs with, they're the experts on what they want and need. And so
mhm.
listen,
Yeah.
and take that on board and advocate then if they aren't being heard. And I
Mhm,
think I mentioned before, like the kind of the challenge often around funding models for any of the kind of work that we do in the charity or humanitarian sector is that sometimes those donors and those funders are disconnected from the community,
mhm,
because they're not geographically in the same place and they've got different like kind of priorities of what they're
mhm,
doing. And I think trying to bridge that gap and say, actually, this is what's needed and here's why, so that it's not the community having to advocate for themselves when they're already, potentially struggling or challenging, but facing challenges with something, but you kind of advocating and saying, this is what's needed and we're going to push back until like this is what they're going to receive
mhm.
as well.
Yeah, that's such great advice. I think it's very useful to keep in mind. But what other advice would you have for individuals or organizations who are looking to actively support girls' rights and head towards that more equitable future? Just, I know it's like you said, it's quite far in the future, but what advice
Yeah.
would you have?
So I think for individuals, I think it would be like find your niche. Like, what's the thing that you really care about? Because we know that gender inequality spans pretty much every potential facet of society. And so, if
Mhm,
you're passionate about climate or about economics or about animal welfare or about programming or mental health or healthcare, whatever the niche that you're interested in, there will be a way of applying a gender lens to that. And so for individuals, that's what I would say is find the thing that you really care about, because trying to consider um, equity or equality in the whole is so massive that we need people doing each one of those things so that we can all kind of build together, build this bigger like
Mhm.
jigsaw. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people to find the thing that they care about, and apply a gender lens to that. And I think for organizations, I mentioned before, like so many of these challenges are systemic.
Mhm.
um, we know that the gender pay gap exists. We know that gender stereotypes really hold women back in the workplace. And so I always would want organizations to really, before we start talking about what we're going to do to serve our community, like how are we supporting our own organization and our own team?
Mhm.
Are we modeling equality here? Like, what do our policies say? Are we also looking after like the culture and the health of our organization from a gendered lens as well? Because that has ripple effects on, on the work that we do as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd definitely be taking on the individual advice for myself.
Would your answer be, do you think?
That's so hard for me to kind of I think that's what I'm trying to figure out at this moment is what would
Okay.
my niche be? And I think I guess my niche when I eventually figure out what it is would definitely be drawing on personal experiences and what I've seen and what I've lived through. And I think that is what has led me to kind of develop helping her is what I've
Mm-hmm.
seen and what I've been through and what, you know, culturally what I've seen in my culture and how there are these systemic problems, and obviously I can't single-handedly kind of solve all these systemic problems, but
Yeah.
I think eventually when I find my niche, I will try to work on that.
Yeah, but I mean, but that is it though. Like you said, if it's your lived experience, that, like you're embodying that, and so
Mhm,
you're such an incredible representative then of the work that would need to be done, the changes that would need to be made, and that's coming from such an authentic place that that's a challenge that we often see in the humanitarian sector, is that there's real white saviorism because it's people
mhm,
who are passionate about this work, but they've never experienced these situations, and so they are applying then their lens of privilege, white privilege, to the situations, and that
mhm,
can be really problematic if it's not examined. And it doesn't mean that you can't provide value and worth if you haven't been through every single situation, because that
mhm.
wouldn't physically be possible to
Yeah,
have been through all of those things. But I think it's so important, if you don't have that lived experience, that you are then interrogating your own practice and
mhm,
saying, what could I potentially be bringing, or how could my privilege actually be helping me in this situation, and hindering me being a really good practitioner. So I think like you've already got your niche, right? Like
yeah.
coming from a place of passion and lived experience is so important.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with I think the self-evaluation that everyone needs to kind of go through, especially when doing activism is you're putting yourself in a position where you're helping others, but we kind of have to evaluate why you're doing
Right.
it. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because it there's the conversation, the kind of question of, can anything really be altruistic? Can we ever really do anything from the good of our heart that isn't going to be reciprocal to us in some
Mhm.
way? And I'm not sure that there is anything, but I think the challenge then is, if you don't look at why you are doing this work,
Mhm.
that's what you can really easily enter the drama triangle where you're trying to rescue in a situation,
Yeah.
um, and if you don't look at that, that can be really challenging and problematic.
Mhm.
And I definitely had some times early on in my career where I was working really hard, working really long hours, because I thought, well, if I don't, and this work doesn't get done, then these people won't get the support they deserve. And
Mhm.
I kind of inadvertently then placed myself in a position of a rescuer, even though I wasn't aware of it at the time. But
Yeah.
I was thinking, well, these people are saying that they need some help and some support, and I can offer that, so I'll just keep going and
Mhm.
going and going. And actually it's not helpful at all, because um I wasn't aware of like why I was doing it. um
Yeah.
and I think that's why now having therapy and clinical supervision of people to say, just going to check in about why, let's just check in about your boundaries.
Mhm.
How often are you working? Are you Are you looking after yourself? And that's
Mhm.
also why, the joyful activists is something I'm so passionate about, because it can be really hard to uphold boundaries in this kind of work when there is
Mhm.
so much need. We can
Yeah.
turn the news on and we can find despair and challenge and
Mhm.
significant humanitarian crises everywhere when we turn the news on. And
Yeah.
so it's then really hard. How do you switch off from that when you can't unsee it? And it can feel really
Mhm.
selfish then to look after yourself and, turn your laptop off and put your out of office on and go and do something that's joyful or fun when you know
Yeah.
that that stuff's going on. But and that's why it's so important to then stay connected, because there are so many other people doing it, and you can kind of tag
Mhm.
team and say, I'm going to rest and then I'll come back and I'll have more energy, and I'll be more likely to be of use or help
Mhm.
if I have, you know, checked in with myself as well.
Definitely, I think that's very important. So finally, what are some upcoming projects or goals you're excited about or you're working towards? And how can our listeners support the Joyful Activists and any other projects that you're involved in?
Great question. So I'm really excited about Joyful Activists. It's been about a year in the making. So people can follow us on LinkedIn and on Instagram and sign up to our newsletter. Our website is launching soon, and all of our virtual workshops will be launching as well in the next month or so. So, yeah, sign up to our newsletter, follow us on social media, and you'll get all of the latest updates. And then come to virtual workshops, come and look after yourself, come and connect with other activists, have some fun, take part in some joyful activities, come on retreats, like just come and connect and look after yourself. That would be my kind of recommendation about that. I'm also really excited. I'm about to start my final master's module. So, like I said, I'm doing it very part time, basically doing
Mhm.
one module a year. So, I start my next module next month, which is around education, conflict, and peace. So, I'm really looking forward to learning more in that as well. And as I mentioned, I lead the Girls' Rights Collective UK, which is our UK-wide professionals network. So if anyone listening works or volunteers with girls in the UK and you want to connect with other organisations and activists in the girls sector, then you can do. So just send me an email, find me on LinkedIn, and I can send you the joining link. We've got a virtual community you can join, and it's an app as well. So basically just like LinkedIn, but just for the girls sector. So I'm really excited about that. I launched that about 3 or 4 months ago. And so you can sign up there and join thematic communities for your area of expertise or interest, and connect with anyone else that's doing this work.
That's amazing. I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye out for everything and signing up to everything. But thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed the conversation we've had. But thank you so much.
Thanks so much.